Good morning. Welcome to this week's episode of Learn with Lorna. This is episode number 218, if you can believe that. We have been going now for, nearly 5 years. It'll be 5 years actually this week. So there we go. So welcome to episode number 218 of Learn with Lorna. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland. We have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. We have Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. We have Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William and Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre in Portree. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. And apologies again that this one has had a slightly bumpy start. It's done the thing it didn't do last week or the week before, which is it hasn't gone live straight away and I had to reboot everything. So apologies for that. I have no idea what makes that happen. So welcome to episode 218, where we'll be taking a look at some more stories from the fantastic West Highland Museum archive collection, which we hold on behalf of West Highland Museum in Fort William. We last looked at this collection over 4 years ago. I said to my colleague Rory in Fort William, we must do another episode on the West Highland Museum collection. And when I look back, it was episode number 32 that we last looked at specifically at this collection, so it's high time that we revisited it. So thank you to Rory, my colleague in Lochaber Archives, for his work in selecting a whole new range of items from this collection for us to focus on today. So first of all, a reminder about the collection and the museum and why we hold the collection. So if I go to the description, I'll go straight to West Highland Museum for their own description. West Highland Museum is one of the oldest museums in the Highlands. It was founded in 1922 by a group of local enthusiasts led by Victor Hodgson, who had neither a collection nor a building to display it in. Victor Hodgson devoted many years to a detailed study of the history and archaeology of the Western Highlands, and in 1922 founded the West Highland Museum in Fort William, of which he was secretary. It collected Croft House furniture and other artefacts. In 1925, after several temporary exhibitions and the acquisition of significant collections, the museum launched a fundraising appeal, and in 1926 purchased the present building, a former branch of the British Linen Bank. Descendants of Victor Hodgson are still involved with the museum today. So that's West Highland Museum. It sits in the centre of Fort William. It cares for a whole range of material relating to the Western Highlands, artefacts and objects, but also it has written archival collections, and that's what we house in Lochaber Archive Centre on their behalf. So we look after their documentary collections, an agreement that's been in place since 2013. So the collection remains the property of West Highland Museum, but it's accessible via Lochaber Archive Centre. We often share items from this collection on our social media and in talks and presentations. And if you're local to the Lochaber area, you'll know we often collaborate with West Highland Museum for all sorts of other events and activities as well. I mentioned that this collection, the agreement for housing this collection started in 2013, but that collection has been added to ever since. And so Rory regularly takes deposits in from staff at West Highland Museum, bringing along material to add in to the archive collection at Lochaber Archive Centre. So what sort of material is in this collection? Well, there are the papers of Arrasig Estate, the Nigel Banks Mackenzie papers, collected Scottish and Jacobite papers, the Lochgarry collection, and a range of smaller collections. So a whole range of materials such as the Fort William Bowling and Recreation Company, or I'm saying company, that doesn't seem right, I've written CO. MacDonald of Glenaladale papers, the records of the Ben Nevis Observatory and Summit Hotel. So it's a really diverse mix of items, just like the papers of the Wick Society that we hold on their behalf at Nucleus. It's a similar sort of range of material. So we're going to just look at some examples from this collection. So if we start with the Ben Nevis Observatory and Summit Hotel, which is something that people always find extraordinary to believe that there was a hotel at the top of Ben Nevis. So this is some background to the Ben Nevis Observatory and Hotel. In 1877, the president of the Royal Meteorological Society proposed that mountain observatories on isolated peaks should be established. The Ben Nevis Observatory was opened on the 17th of October 1883, with data collection starting on the 28th of November of that year. The project was funded mostly by private donors, including Queen Victoria, and was run by the Scottish Meteorological Society and the Royal Societies of Edinburgh and London. The building was manned by a superintendent and 2 assistants who were responsible for taking hourly readings of the office barometer, the outdoor thermometers, rainfall, cloud, and wind notes. They also made observations about the depth of snow, the atmospheric dust, the ozone, the rain band, earth currents, duration of sunshine, and earthquakes or tremors where appropriate. The results were telegraphed to the town below, where they were used to warn shipping of storms and gales in the Atlantic. In around 1894, a small hotel was opened to accommodate visitors, annexed to the main observatory building. Insufficient funds and conflicting scientific evidence regarding the importance of the observatory led to its closure in 1904. So it wasn't there for a huge amount of time, but we hold visitor books for the observatory, and they are fabulous. Here are some of my favourite entries from the Ben Nevis Observatory visitor books. August the 25th, 1884, Arthur Blott and Greg Bray. Greg Bray from Leeds says, "It would add to people's interest in the observatory and assist in procuring subscriptions if luncheon was provided." James Kemp Jr. on the 5th of September said, "It's hellish up here." On the 13th of June 1885, Dr. Jones from London wrote, "6-hour journey through deep snow, everything in good order, Jones and Gill and Co., guided by John MacDonald, an excellent guide." Bertie Borthwick wrote, "Missed the view, viewed the mist." William Gunn of Inverness said, "After experiencing the difficulty of dragging my mortal body to this elevation, I have full admiration for Mr. White's perseverance in planting a miniature hotel in this region of eternal snows." Very poetic. William Calwell wrote, "The crowning glory of Scottish scenery, overstopping all." Some interesting notes about why people were up there as well. So, for instance, in September 1885, we can see Vernon Harcourt and Harold Dixon and Mrs. Dixon, all from Oxford University, saying that they were there to measure the illuminating power of candles and pentane flames under reduced pressure by incandescent lamp. So there's some people going up for very specific scientific research reasons. But the book is also used to make points. So on the 30th of June, John F. Jackson from Eglinton Street, Belfast, wrote, "This is my first ascent. Home rule for Ireland now or sooner." Other than a little bit of advertising, so Sam Austin, who had come from Birmingham, wrote, "Wet, wet, wet, but thanks to Austin's starch glaze, my collar has retained its stiffness throughout." I love the thought that you would use that opportunity to advertise a business. On the 11th of August, Pauline McIntyre from George Square in Edinburgh wrote, "Jolly glad to hear that coffee now approacheth." And then an interesting one on the 3rd of September of that year, Ahmed Misra wrote, from India wrote, "I believe that I am the first Indian Mohammedan who ascended this hill, and a few more in the Highlands." So just looking through that visitor book for the observatory and hotel, you just get so many little glimpses of humour, of companies that exist, of adverts, of names of guides who took people up, reasons that people were up to do research. There's quite a lot of people who write, this is my 150th ascent, this is my 20th ascent. There was one I read that said, I think this is my 6th ascent and I'm never coming back. How funny to get to 6 and then decide never to come back. If we stay in Fort William, we can also find within the West Highland Museum collections the minute book of the Fort William Literary Association, dating from 1907 to 1913. The Fort William Literary Association was founded in 1907, and initially it held its meetings in the United Free Church Hall in the town. And a browse through the minute book gives again a wealth of information about the members, the number of people attending the Literary Association, their interests and activities. I have to say, I think I would have quite enjoyed being a member of this, just some of the things that come up in the minute book. So here are some extracts from the minutes. 9th of April 1907, Mr. Mackay presided and there were 47 members present. The meeting opened with prayer, after which the minutes of the previous meeting were read and approved of. The first number of the Association magazine was submitted by Mr. Miles and Miss Duncan, the joint editors, and contained, with addition of an editorial, 11 articles with the following titles. So they've produced a magazine and these are the articles that they've put into it. 1. Enthusiasm. 2. The pleasures of a holiday in Skye. 3. Education in other departments than literature and science. 4. Angus of the Wind. 5. Echoes. 6. Influence, a poem. 7. Childish memories. 8. Ticonderoga? Someone can correct that. 9. German stories from a German picture book without pictures. 10. Spring, a poem. And 11. The Great Harmonist. And then it finishes saying, during the evening there was a short interval for social intercourse during which the company was entertained to a cup of tea. I feel like we don't use quite as elaborate language now. We might say they had a cup of tea, but they were entertained to a cup of tea. So it sounds like a really interesting group of people putting together articles, writing things, sharing them. But as well as that, they had talks and lectures. So on the 12th of November 1907, the president gave a lecture, and I would love to read the whole of the press coverage for it because it's so maybe what you would expect from a literary association. It's so beautifully written, but it's too long for me to share. But here are some parts of the press write-up of the talk given at this meeting. Fort William Literary Association. On Tuesday the 12th current, the Fort William Literary Association held their opening meeting for the winter session. The opening lecture was given by the President, Mr. Mackay, M.A., the subject being From Fort William to Finland, illustrated by limelight views. In spite of the fact that a terrible storm of wind and rain accompanied by vivid flashes of lightning was raging round that evening, there was a large and appreciative audience, which certainly felt rewarded for having braved the inclemency of the weather, for the lecture kept its promise and transported them from wild, wet Lochaber to sunny Finland. Mr. Mackay began by giving a few concise facts about the country of Finland, generally, its history, its people, and their occupations. He then briefly sketched his journey to that wonderful land of the north, of which so little is known in this country. Beginning from Lochaber, he gave a brief description of the magnificent mountain, moor and loch scenery through which he passed before reaching Edinburgh, and of which he tried to carry away an indelible impression so as to be able to compare it with the beauties of the new land to which he was travelling. From Smoky Hull, he set sail for the Switzerland of the North in the Polaris, one of the Finland Steamship Company's magnificently equipped steamers. His audience felt that they would willingly spend a week in one of those floating palaces, peacefully enjoying dolce far niente as they gazed at the brilliant blue of the skies and the deeper blue of the North Sea, listening to the rhythmic beat of the screw and the distant music of the dances of the steerage passengers, enjoying the varied foreign fare, perhaps preferring the delicious coffee to the oft-appearing smorgasbords. Elsinore, that town of poetic memory, was the first place dwelt on in detail. Then came Copenhagen, so interesting to any reader of British history, and so on, amid the beautiful islands of the Baltic, until the ancient capital of Finland was reached. From there onwards, it was one bewilderingly beautiful panorama of quaint little towns, lovely lakes embowered in trees, pine-clad hills, magnificent waterfalls and peaceful canals. Fort William and its storms were forgotten as the audiences looked on these bewitching scenes and listened to Mr. Mackay's realistic and poetic descriptions of the wonders of that great northern land. I just thought that was so beautifully written. I just thought it was really evocative. It concludes by saying that the audience was enthralled from beginning to end. On the 10th of December 1907, William Cameron, MA, gave a lecture on surnames and the development of names in general, all the way from the Old Testament and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans through to the current usage of names and naming patterns. In November 1908, the Literary Association decided that they should meet somewhere more neutral. You may remember they were meeting in the United Free Church Hall, but they decided that if they moved somewhere more neutral, then perhaps it would extend their sphere of usefulness in the town. In the end, they agreed to accept the offer of Mrs. Cameron Lucy and meet in the reading room in future. And this is a space in Monsey Square in Fort William, next to West Highland Museum and now owned by West Highland Museum. So that's a nice wee tie-in. And there's an interesting entry from November 1912, which once again illustrates what I've said so many times over the years, both through Learn with Lorna and through everything else I do, that archives can very often reflect or contain certain discussions or debates or thoughts or decisions or incidents which remain very relevant to current situations. So we may read something and go, good grief, that's so reflective of something we are currently talking about. Some debates roll on and on. This is an entry from November 1912. There were 45 members present as Mr. Mackay occupied the chair. The opening lecture of the session, entitled War, was given by Sheriff Malcolm. The learned sheriff gave a most interesting and instructive history of war and expounded its effects upon nations and people as shown in ancient and modern history, and traced the evolution of warfare up to the present time. He pointed out that whilst war had often most mischievously been waged with no other apparent object than the mere love of fighting, yet that with the advance of civilization, perhaps war had become one of the strongest factors at the disposal of mankind in maintaining the peace of the world. And of course the horrendous irony of that theoretical point that could war be used to maintain peace is of course that they would shortly enter an absolutely devastating and horrific war. And it would be interesting to know what their thoughts were after that. But instead of coming forward to look at World War I want to go back in time instead and come to a different part of the West Highland Museum collections, the diaries of the Reverend Archibald Clark from 1858 to 1868. Reverend Archibald Clark was born at Glenlonach near Oban on the 26th of May 1813, son of Duncan Clark and Margaret Carmichael. He was licensed to preach by the Presbytery of Cooper in 1835, after which he became assistant to the minister at St Columba's in Glasgow. He was ordained to his first charge at Harachel in 1838, translated to Durnish and Skye in 1840, and to Ardnamurchan in 1841. In 1844, he became minister at Kilmally, where he remained until his death in 1887. He was awarded the degree of Doctor of Laws by the University of Glasgow. He married Jessie MacLeod, and the couple had 11 children. And his diaries contain some really great stories from the pastoral aspect of his work. The part of his calling that was focused on visiting and caring for people and going out and seeing members of the congregation. So here are some examples from his diary about times that he visited people and the conversations he had with them. Lady Arbinger sent to jail, or rather gave up to the fiscal, a servant girl, Flora Cameron, for stealing some small articles, soap from her toilet table, a candle or two. Lady Arbinger is generally abused for meanness in taking up such trifles. So generally people think, why have you bothered pursuing that and putting a girl to prison? Strange are people's notions about morality. The sin of theft is never regarded. The value of the property stolen above is taken into consideration. But the commandment is, thou shalt not steal. And I think Lady Arbinger is to be much commended for her conduct. Another entry. Today I visited Angus McPhee Clunes, 95 years old. He is one of 2 survivors of the first Fencible regiment that Lochiel raised in Lochaber about 1786, afterwards incorporated into the Duke of Gordon's regiment. He is a pauper, bedridden and blind, yet most resigned and ever cheerful. I also visited Widow Kennedy, 73, also blind and bedridden. She receives an allowance from the parish, but is most carefully attended to by a daughter who suffers much pain and discomfort solely from care to her mother. Widow Kennedy is likewise calm and resigned. Neither of these parties is an enlightened Christian, but I do hope that both are devoted and seeking after God. It's just interesting that through this diary we get people's names, we get something about people's experiences, something about people's lives, but also some great stories. I visited old Angus MacKinnon, one of the old Loch-Arkaig men, an unsophisticated Highlander, quite a man of the older times, who can neither read nor write. But I observed regarding him and a few others in the parish, their propriety and politeness of manner are beyond all praise. He tells me of a crock of gold said to be found at Badbury some 80 years ago, that Peggy MacDonald, wife of the ploughman to Mr. Butter, factor on the forfeited estates of Lochaber, found a small crock of gold in the place pointed out. She was planting potatoes there, and had a bag made of sheepskin for holding the splits. On lighting the crock, she emptied its contents into the bag. So she's found this gold, she's poured it into her bag, hoisted it onto her shoulder, and marched away with it to her husband, who was ploughing at some little distance. Her husband had no more than once grumbled, so he'd regularly grumbled, that she had brought him no token. She now marched up to him quite joyfully, saying, "I have now brought you a token." But there were some others who were within hearing distance whom she had not noticed. Her husband, understanding that she had found something valuable and wishing to conceal it from the knowledge of the third parties, stamped his foot and said, "Go home, you blockhead." She, stung by this contemptuous treatment, at once went to Mr. Butter the factor and handed the treasure over to him, and it was this which enabled him to buy the estate of Fiscali. And then two final ones. Old Angus McPhee at Banavie says he is 98. He was telling me the other day that he remembers the bonfires of 1784, kindled in honour of Lochiel getting his forfeited estates back. A strange link between the past and the present, and yet this is only 80 years ago. And then the last one. I had last night a visit from old Mrs. Rankin of Lochyside, still as bitter as ever about her daughter-in-law. Great stories in there. All sorts of, like I say, stories about people and individuals and events, echoing what we know in archives all the time, what many of us know to be true, which is that so often older people in our community have so many memories and so much information and experience to share, if only we can capture it. So thank goodness that in the 1850s, Reverend Clark sat and listened to these people and wrote those down in his diary, because now we have that link in chain. Interesting to see him go, what an interesting link to the past, to remember something from the 1700s, and now we're talking about it when it was written in the 1800s. And also, of course, those extracts do nothing to expel the image of mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationships, which made me chuckle. I'm going to finish by telling the story from a very dramatic document that's from 100 years earlier than that one. Anyone interested in the Jacobites should definitely make a trip to Lochaber Archive Centre, because between the Cameron of Lochiel collection and the West Highland Museum papers, we have a substantial amount of really fascinating Jacobite material. Within the West Highland Museum papers, we have a bound volume entitled A True State of Prince Charles Stuart's Miraculous Escape After the Battle of Culloden, written by John MacDonald of Borrowdale, and it details all that happened to Bonnie Prince Charlie between that disastrous Jacobite defeat at the Battle of Culloden until the moment that he managed to escape to France. The writer of this document, John MacDonald, was the son of Angus MacDonald of Borrowdale, who in 1745 was the first person to receive a commission from Charles Edward Stuart. John had been educated in Europe, but he returned in 1745 to join Prince Charles and served as, during the campaign, as lieutenant in Clanranald's regiment, and he was later pardoned for his role in the Jacobite risings. But it's interesting just to see that this document was written by someone who was there at the time. And his account of Bonnie Prince Charlie's escape after the battle starts like this. When the prince at the Battle of Culloden perceived that the horse he rode was wounded, and that any stand he and his small band could make was needless, he made off, accompanied by 2 Irishmen, Mr. Sullivan and Neil, his aide-de-camp, and a few more, and took little or no rest until they arrived at Glenbeesdale, Arrasig, which is a pendicle belonging to the farm of Borrowdale, being the place he first landed in the continent at his arrival. So he, describing that he's standing at the battle, it's been a huge Jacobite defeat. He realises that those of them who are left, because of course it was particularly brutal for the Jacobites, those of them who are left have gone, there's no point making a stand now, we just need to get out the way. And so they went as fast as they could until they got to Borrowdale in Lochaber. Now, Rory takes up the tale here, summarising the rest of the volume. The prince and his companions rested at Glenbeesdale for 3 days before a boat belonging to John MacDonald, the author, is procured to transport them to Uist. From Uist, it is planned that the prince will travel first to Stornoway and then to France if a vessel which allows them to do so is found. Travelling to Stornoway first, Mr. Sullivan and his aide-de-camp do indeed find such a means of transport, but decide to leave for France without waiting for the prince. What follows for the prince has now become the stuff of legend. He travels to Benbecula with the help of Clanranalds, and then, aided by Flora MacDonald, he and his remaining companions board a boat bound for Skye. The prince does this, disguised as Flora MacDonald's Irish maid, Betty Burke. And the exact quote from the document is, "He, being in this manner disappointed, thought proper to risk his person in the hands of the Clanranald people in South Uist, who have all the aid and assistance in their power, until such time the country was surrounded by his enemies. Then, clearly perceiving the impossibility of escaping, he was advised to go to Clanranald House in Benbecula, 25 miles from the place he was then at, and endeavour to ferry to the Isle of Skye, accompanied by Miss Flora MacDonald, and he, under the name of Miss Betty Burke, effected their escape and arrived safe at Kingsborough in Trottenish, part of Lord MacDonald's estate, where Miss MacDonald parted from him. The prince then moves swiftly between the estates of those families who are loyal to him, sleeping a night here, a night there, helped along the way by ordinary Gaels, who by now are aware that a £30,000 bounty is on the prince's head. Heading back to the mainland after some time, the prince makes it to Glenfinnan, this time accompanied by John MacDonald and MacDonald of Glenaladale. And the document says, really gives an idea of the sacrifice that MacDonald of Glenaladale made to support Bonnie Prince Charlie leaving. It says, the prince at all times entertained the greatest regard for MacDonald of Glenaladale's integrity and capacity in aiding him as far as was in his power. He ordered me, John MacDonald, to go to him and acquaint him of his present situation, and hoped that he would meet him in the small present company in the woods of Borrowdale next night. After Glenaladale considered this message, he looked up it exceedingly hard to he looked on it as exceedingly hard to depart from his wife and his 5 pretty children, and his great stock of cattle were before then taken away by the enemy, and, having received 3 wounds at Culloden, of which one of them was not fully cured. So he's received this letter saying, can you come and help me? And Glenaladale's going, I've just got home, not long home from the battle, in a matter of weeks or months. He's got wounds, he doesn't want to leave his family, he's had stock already stolen. But it says, notwithstanding these considerations, he despised them, and he thought it his duty to grant all the aid and assistance in his power to save the poor distressed prince, notwithstanding the great temptation of £30,000 sterling promised now by the government to any that would deliver him up. The small gang proceeded, so he did go and join them. The small gang proceeded under darkness to the top of a high mountain between Locharcaig and Lochmorra, hearing a camp of enemies lying on each side of them. In the course of 3 nights, they passed between 4 camps and 25 patrols, all the while managing to stay unseen. MacDonald writes that the enemy were sometimes so nigh that we heard them frequently speaking. On the 3rd morning, they arrived near Lochernhead, on hollow ground covered by long heather and young birches, all 5 in the party, lying down for a rest, almost fainting for lack of food. In an act of generosity, MacDonald offers the prince the last of his food, which he has kept in a napkin, and the prince insists that the party share it, which they do. And it would be several months before Bonnie Prince Charlie would eventually manage to escape to France. And we hold another document that tells the story of that adventure, of an adventure that he had there. But that's for another day. No time to go into that today. But I hope that that episode has given you an idea of the range of material that exists within the West Highland Museum collections. We've gone from the observatory at the top of Ben Nevis, through the diaries of a minister, through the Literary Association, to this 1700s contemporary document telling the story of Bonnie Prince Charlie escaping. So it's a wonderful collection, and we're absolutely delighted to hold it on behalf of our friends at West Highland Museum. So if you haven't been to West Highland Museum, absolutely go and have a look at some of their material, Jacobite, World War II, all sorts of really fascinating material relating to the Western Highlands. If you want to see the documents that I've referred to, or any of the ones I referred to in the last episode on this collection, then please do go to Lochaber Archives or get in touch with them. I hope you can join me next week. Next week I'll be looking at Tales from the Toll Booth, so I'm really looking forward to writing that one. That one is going to be all about the prison, things that have happened in the toll booths and prison in the past, so looking forward to writing that one. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. And thank you, all of you who have said you've come in late. I'm just delighted that you came in at all. There was a moment where I was speaking to no viewers, and I thought, I wonder if this is going out at all, or if nobody wants Learn with Lorna anymore. But yes, thank you all for joining me. It's very much appreciated, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.